All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Jim K. Ford Sens Nation podcast. And coming up today, well, the Stanley Cup Final is set. Some 48 days after the Ottawa Senators played their last game, they finally whittled down the Stanley Cup playoffs to two teams. It will be the Florida Panthers against the Edmonton Oilers. Jack Capuano, according to a report, has already been not offered. I guess nothing. He has not been offered a contract for this fall with the Ottawa Senators to continue on as associate coach after 5 years. We'll get into that. Cody Ceci, Connor Brown versus Vladimir Tarasenko in the Cup Final. And we'll talk a little bit about Sean Donovan's son, Jorian, who had a very, very good Memorial Cup. All still ahead today on the Jim K. Ford Sens Nation podcast. Again, to Steve Warren, along with the coach, Greg Kennedy. Greg, how are you?
I'm good, Steve. And as you were going through that there, I know we didn't talk about, we usually have a little bit of a pre-show meeting here and discuss topics, and we didn't really talk about it, but am I the only one who thinks this thing goes on way too long? Like it's June the 3rd today. We're still not going to start the final till June the 8th. Like, is there some reason why we have to wait so long? Some reason why the Stanley Cup playoffs have to take, we're into our third month for crying out loud. We started in April. Does it have to go this long? I'm not a fan of this.
Well, I think, and you've been immersed in minor hockey. You see that get going every year in mid-August for some reason. Why don't we start in September? Start your training camps in September. Well, they do, I guess, but why don't we start earlier, though, is my point. Start the regular season in the NHL. Early September, regular season, obviously going up against the NFL. They'd rather not do that. But they mostly go up against the NFL for the rest of the season anyway. But I don't know. I just it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to see all the minor kids ending their summers early, going to tryouts in mid-August, and the Stanley Cup or the NHL doesn't get their preseason going until the middle of September. But that would take care of your problem. It would be done earlier. Get it done in May.
Do you remember when the first round, when it was a best of 5 or even when it was a best of 7, it would be back-to-back, night off, travel, back-to-back, then night off game, night off game, night off game. But you would play the first 4 games in 5 nights. It was always that way. Whether it was a best of 5 or a best of 7, they played back-to-backs. And now it's like, oh, no, we can't have that. Like, why not?
Yeah, the world is all about analytics now and pitch counts and things like that. There were no pitch counts when we were kids. They were just get out there until you suck. That was pretty much how it was handled. We're sounding like old guys now, but I would like to see. No, I mean, it's perfect weather. I mean, today is, like you said, June 3rd, and it's not really hockey weather anymore, but it's always hockey in terms of stuff to talk about. And we are now at the Stanley Cup Final, the Florida Panthers against the Edmonton Oilers. I'm wildly surprised, Greg, that the Oilers took down the Dallas Stars. I really thought the Oilers would be easy fodder for the Dallas Stars, given their goaltending, given I'm not that wildly sold on the Oilers defense. I'm really surprised that Dallas is out and Edmonton is through.
Yeah, and their lack of depth up front. Like I picked Dallas to win the Cup in September. I picked Dallas to win the Cup at the start of the playoffs. I still was picking Dallas to win the Cup before the last game. And if you would have told me that the Edmonton Oilers were going to get 10 shots on net and still win, do you know how many teams in the history of the Stanley Cup playoffs, Steve, since they've been keeping track of shots on goal, do you know how many teams have had 10 shots on net and won?
Not many.
1.
Wow.
Yeah, this is the first time. Like, how does that happen? But you watch them play, the lack of depth, the lack of depth on the blue line, the goaltending that's inconsistent. I just think that I got to pick Florida in like 5. I just can't see them being able to continue this way. A good, strong, deep team that forechecks them into the ice and stifles them through the neutral zone. The only way Florida loses is if they take too many stupid penalties and the Oilers power play stays as hot as it's been for the last 2 games. Otherwise, I think it's a short series, and I think it's Florida all day long.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. Florida was my pick from day one going into the Stanley Cup playoffs, so I might as well hang in there now that they're 4 wins away. But I do think they're a better hockey club, and I'm surprised the Oilers are even here at this stage. But there's a little part of me that feels like, is Connor McDavid going to allow this opportunity to get away? That goal he scored in the deciding game against Dallas one of the prettiest goals you'll ever see. It just feels like sometimes that guy is just so much better than everybody else that he's literally capable of going while he's sitting on the bench. Okay, I'm going to go out right now and settle this thing. It's just that level of talent.
Yeah. How do you feel about Steve Simmons wrote an article today in the Toronto Sun, and basically the theme of it was that sports is better when the best players are on the winning teams, championship teams. How do you feel about that? Me personally, I could care less what team the best player's on. I generally cheer against the best player. When I was younger and into my adult years, I like a good team. I'm not a fan of a best player. I don't think the best player has to win to still be called the best player. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm surprised. It was Steve Simmons, you say, that said that?
Yep.
Yeah, it makes it sound like he's not that big a hockey fan to me. It's the kind of thing that people who aren't really into the NHL, who follow it at this time of the year because they kind of want to be part of it, it's the kind of thing they say. Like, the same people who are saying things like, well, they're the last Canadian team left, so I've got to cheer for them. No, hockey fans don't think that way. And I don't think they think in terms of that example you just gave. I don't feel like that's the case at all. At least it's not for me. It tells me that you're looking for celebrity. The whole world's looking for celebrity, and that includes the big stars, and it's better with that. It's like, yeah, most teams have a star. So, yeah, Connor McDavid is the star. He's the best player in the NHL, and it is going to be neat for this novelty of him getting there this one time, but that doesn't mean I want to see Connor McDavid in there every single year. So I totally disagree.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Like I always, to me, I take it back to golf. Was golf better because Tiger Woods won every week and won all those majors all that time? I don't think so. I think that sports is best when underdogs, not necessarily bad underdogs. Like I don't like it. There's certain years there, like when Calgary was in the final a few years back, when Edmonton was in the final, when Montreal was in the final. There are years where I look at it, I don't like that kind of underdog story. But I like a team that's maybe a little bit under the radar. A good team, but not necessarily one of the top 2 or 3 picks to win that year, comes through and wins because they've got a very good team. I've always believed that a lot of times it comes down to it's not always the team with the best players. Sometimes it's the players with the best team. And I'm a big believer in that. And I watch Dallas play and I watch Florida play, and they are that type of program is what those guys have in those cities. It's a team effort, and it's deep depth talent, depth of game plan, good coaching. That's what I prefer. I could care less who has the best player, and I could care less if the best player wins or not.
That's the word right there. I just need to care.
Yeah.
I need to care because, maybe I'm caring this year because there is that, the star factor of Connor McDavid this year. Maybe I'm caring because of the underdog. Maybe I'm caring because it's a team I love. Maybe I'm caring because it's a team I hate. Mm-hmm. I've always said that for years, that, whether it's the Leafs or the Habs, when they drop out of the Stanley Cup playoffs, my interest level drops quite a bit as well, because I'm either in it to, love a team, hate a team. I need to care about the outcome. However we get there, it doesn't have to be stars, doesn't have to be just so long as I care. And it can be one of those 4 elements. That's what it comes down for me, whether I care about the outcome. And if I don't, then maybe I make a bet with Greg Kennedy on what the outcome will be. And then suddenly I do care about a series that I know otherwise normally wouldn't. Exactly. That's what gambling is all about, because people want to be able to care about the outcome of their sports.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I agree.
Okay, so we've got the Florida Panthers in there, and Vladimir Tarasenko. Who would have thunk that a member of the Ottawa Senators, and that shorthanded, they didn't even have an opening night full roster, that shorthanded, flawed roster, that somebody on that opening night roster this season was going to play in the Stanley Cup Final. Vladimir Tarasenko is that guy, got traded at the deadline, obviously. And I wonder, I was reading this week how last summer he was working out with Sergei Bobrovsky, and Bobrovsky was trying to recruit him. And the way things went down when free agency came around, it sounded like Tarasenko wanted to stay with the Rangers, but found out in the first week of free agency it wasn't going to happen. And he was not happy. He wanted to be a Ranger. The Rangers couldn't or wouldn't sign him. And So here's a case of he fires his agent and then goes quiet for 2 or 3 weeks. So at the end of July, he suddenly signs a 1-year deal with the Ottawa Senators. Meanwhile, he's working out with Bobrovsky in Florida because that's where his family is. I wonder if this wasn't choreographed from day one, on the day that he signed with the Ottawa Senators, that he'd be with the Panthers, not only a team where his family, in the same state his family resides, but a team that has a hell of a good chance of going to the Stanley Cup Final again.
Yeah, it's one of those things, right? You get to a certain veteran status in the NHL as a free agent with no trade clauses, and it's way worse in the NBA, but it's starting to creep into the NHL too, where certain players want to play in certain markets or for certain coaches or with certain friends, and it's starting to creep in, and I think we're only going to see more and more of it, especially now that the cap's going back up again. We've recovered, folks, from COVID. This just in. The cap's going to start growing again. So teams are going to have more money now. Are we going to see more and more? Alex DeBrincat wants to play in Detroit. Vladimir Tarasenko wants to play in Florida. Is it going to happen more often now? I fear it will.
The state of Florida is doing very, very well. This is the 5th year in a row one of the Florida teams has represented the East in the Stanley Cup Final. The first 3, Tampa Bay. The last 2, the Florida Panthers. And do you regard those 2 teams as having a sizable advantage on the rest of the league, given the no state tax and the unbelievable weather that they have?
Well, I think it helps them in recruiting. I think it helps them in hometown discounts because players are willing to stay there. But then those same sort of things apply when you're good. If a team is good and has success and does well, that helps in recruiting. If a team is playing well, has success, is a good group, that helps recruit players. It's just chicken and the egg, I guess, a little bit here. Both teams, I prefer to look at them as, especially Tampa, just a really professionally run organization from ownership to GM, especially coach, that players want to be there and buy in. And Florida's kind of become that same sort of thing under Paul Maurice now, and ownership there. Matthew Tkachuk ended up going there, but it wasn't like Matthew said it has to be Florida, right? He was willing to go elsewhere, so I don't think he made that demand. So I don't know. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing to me as far as what is it that draws a player to a market? Is the no tax thing really that big a deal, or does it have more to do with the program and success of a program on the ice?
Yeah, I think, you could ask the question, why weren't they dominant for a lot of their 30-year history in both cases?
Right.
These teams have been quite good, Tampa Bay especially, but they've also in their 30-year, I'm guesstimating Florida's probably a little younger than that, but close to 3 decades in the NHL, they've gone through long stretches of not just being average or not in the playoffs, but being really bad. Mm-hmm. So I think you get momentum on your side when, like you said, you get a good program going, like the Carleton University men's basketball team here that Dave Smart used to run for years. It still continues on because it's got the great reputation. Everybody wants to go there and be part of a winner. And so once you get on a bit of a roll, whether it's Tampa Bay or Florida, you suddenly become a coveted place, and the state tax situation and the weather are just 2 throw-ins on top of that.
Yeah, there's no state tax in Tennessee. And there's not guys flocking to play for the Predators.
Although that's a great market too, though.
Yeah, it is. But okay, Jason, so there you go. So that feeds into your argument. The part of the argument is, okay, Florida's a great place to live. So is Tennessee. Florida has no state tax. Tennessee doesn't have one either. And yet Florida draws players, and Florida is building something, both teams now, versus what's going on in Nashville lately. So I just think that it's not the be all and end all, but it's definitely a consideration for players along with many other things on their list when they're thinking about where they want to go play.
It's not that Canada's teams have never been to the Stanley Cup Final, but here the Edmonton Oilers are, and it's becoming more and more of a rarity. But it's been a long time, 1993, since Canada won a cup. I just look at, for those who are coming at us with the argument of, the state tax situation, American dollar, let's throw that in as well. And golfing year round and the nice weather, like on the other side of the coin, Canada doesn't have those things. And would you maintain the stance you have when you kind of look at the reasons maybe why Canada hasn't won in, 31 years?
Well, I don't know. You still hear stories about the Leafs. There's any number of players who say they'd love to play for the Leafs, and same with the Habs, right? The history of it draws players too. I think it has something to do. Let's not forget, it probably has something to do with where a player comes from too. Where were you born? Where were you raised? What kind of climate were you in when you grew up? What kind of team were you a fan of as a kid? I'm sure there's still. I bet the number is still, if you asked every player in the NHL to be totally honest, what's your favorite team, or maybe what was your favorite team until you signed your first contract? And I bet there'll be a lot of teams with small numbers, but I still bet the Leafs would probably be number one in any poll amongst NHL players. So I think it still draws there. I agree that the weather and the Canadian dollar and yada, yada would affect people not wanting to go to Winnipeg. And it probably factors into not wanting to go to Edmonton and Calgary to a lesser extent. It probably factors into Ottawa too. But I don't think that Vancouver or Montreal or Toronto have a problem getting players to come based on weather and taxes.
Would the media scrutiny play into the discussion at all, given that if you're in Florida or Tampa Bay, another layer to this thing is that if you lose 7-1 and you personally put up a -6 that night, nobody's talking about it the next day.
No.
In the Canadian markets, they want to tar and feather you. They want to talk about it for until the next game anyway. The scrutiny from the fans on social media and from traditional media, online media, it's so different in Canadian markets. And the Toronto Maple Leafs are Exhibit A to that. As you know, I'm not a fan of the blue team. This just in. However, there is a part of me that has some level of sympathy for the players who have to try and thrive as professional athletes in that intense scrutiny and the pressure that goes with the absurd Stanley Cup drought that franchise has going.
Right. Like, you're not going to the grocery store for a week after something like that happens to you. And if you're a Leaf, you're in the middle of a losing streak. You're in the middle of a serious personal funk. You're taking the heat in the press. You're taking the heat on the call-in shows, the radio, the alt sports talk, the TV, TSN, Rogers, whoever is all over you personally or your team. In Canada, it would affect your social life. It would affect your daily routines, where you're going and what you're doing, but would not in, I'll go back to Tennessee. Do you think anybody in Nashville has any idea? They wouldn't even know that the hockey player was in the store, let alone what kind of streak the guy was on. And I'm not clumping everybody together, but just generally speaking, that's the way it would be. So that too, I think, would come down to a player's personality and what type of man you are and how you're affected by things like that. Yes, no doubt about it. A good percentage of players would say, I don't need any of that. I don't want any of that. I'm out of here as soon as I can get out of here, or I'm never, ever going to go there if I haven't been there before. But I still think that other players, like John Tavares, certainly didn't have to go to Toronto. He had a free choice to go anywhere he wanted to go. That speaks to the character of the man. Whether you like him as a player or not, the fact that he was willing to go in there and do that says something about him. And it says something about a Mark Giordano, how much he loved the opportunity to be a Leaf, even though he's late in his career and really didn't bring all that much to help them, and took pay cut after pay cut to stay to help them ice a team. He was willing to go there and willing to play in that market. I think it just really comes down to character and what you're made of as a man, I think.
When we come back on the show, I want to talk about a guy who's been under heavy scrutiny, much maligned at various points in his career, and he's felt that Canadian pressure in Ottawa, in Toronto, and now with Edmonton. I want to talk about Cody Ceci and his situation as he heads off to the Stanley Cup Final with the Oilers, and that's coming up after these words. I am so done with old school Christmas lights. The tangling, the burning out, the minus 30-degree installation dangling from a ladder. Goodbye Christmas lights. Hello Celebrite, your permanent holiday lighting solution. I've got them on my home right now. When it's daylight, they're absolutely invisible. But at nighttime, things come to life. Right now, with the beautiful weather, we're looking forward to Canada Day. And of course, the classic colors of Christmas. You can really make the lights dance, all controlled from your smartphone. And on those nights when there is no occasion or holiday, you can roll with just a beautiful, subtle white light. And the installation team from Celebrate Ottawa was fantastic. So you can keep on rolling with old school Christmas lights, or you can contact them today at celebrate.ca. Yay!
This is Ryan. Ryan would love to start his own podcast as a fun way to create content for all his platforms, to better connect with his customers, and build a new audience. But Ryan isn't great with technology, and he has a lot of questions. What's the easiest way to record a high-quality podcast? Does he need to travel to a studio? What equipment will he need? How does he get his podcast online? What if he has an out-of-town guest? Capital Podcast had all of Ryan's answers. After a free consultation, we took care of everything for him. All Ryan had to worry about was jumping on the mic and starring in his own show. He recorded this week's episode right from his office. His expert guest this week is one of his customers who's in a Chicago hotel room. And Capital Podcast is online with them, making sure the final product is perfect. Easy, convenient, professional. Contact us today and start in your own show with capitalpodcast.ca.
Welcome back to the show. We were just talking earlier about how we have a lot of topics today or not. And then during the break, they were going like, wow, we're already at the 19-minute mark of the show. And we were worried do we have 5 minutes to talk about? Anyway, that's the way it always is. Every once in a while we go, this is a little worse than usual. But no, I think there's lots of neat stuff to talk about. There always is. Hockey always gives us lots of neat stories. And I found the Cody Ceci one kind of interesting. Having covered him in his 6 years in Ottawa, he had a tough go here. It was up and down. You know, it's not like he didn't have any good moments. He was part of the 2017 run to the Stanley Cup Eastern Finals. But he had a lot of nights where, social media was getting on him. Sports talk radio was getting on him. He ends up in Toronto for a year, Pittsburgh for a year, and then he signs a 4-year deal with the Oilers. And, even with the Oilers, even though I'm about to say what I'm going to say, with the Oilers, yeah, he's had a hard time there too. There's been nights where he's just getting buried by the media. But now that all the smoke is cleared, the guy's 30 years of age now, Ottawa native, grew up here, played for the 67s, drafted by his hometown team. Hell, there's even a photo of him when he's 10 years old standing beside Mike Fisher in 2003 before a game for the national anthem. He's all about hockey, all about the Ottawa Senators when he's a kid. And now he's this close to the dream. And he's not just a passenger, Greg. I know you had a chance to look at the game sheet from the final game the other night. Cody Ceci led the Oilers' defense in ice time. And he was out there for the final minute when they have a 1-goal lead and Dallas has pulled their goalie. This is with a Western Conference title on the line. So Cody Ceci gets buried in the social media. And, sometimes he's done some things and you go, whoa, what's going on? But I feel really good for the Ottawa native for all the times that he's been maligned in various markets, particularly Canadian ones, that he's found a coach that obviously trusts him in Chris Knobloch, and he's now getting a chance to play for a Stanley Cup. That's cool.
Yeah, he's found a role, or more appropriately, the coach has identified the role and put him in a place where he can be successful. Through various seasons here in Ottawa, he was okay. Maybe he's not going to be that offensive defenseman guy. He's going to be a shutdown guy, but the rest of the team around him wasn't necessarily strong enough for him to succeed and be that shutdown guy. There's only so much he can do playing defense in the D-zone structure to be that guy. And I think that the time in Pittsburgh probably helped him refine himself, reestablish himself as a player in the league. And as much as I admire the fact that he's gotten where he's gotten to and he put up the stats that you just alluded to, I still think some of it might have to do with the fact that the Edmonton Oilers defensive core isn't quite what it should be when Cody Ceci's your number one guy. No slight on Cody Ceci, no slight on his performance. But I think if he were on any other team that was still playing in the Final Four, I don't know that he would have been the leader in minutes in a game like that.
Yeah, and I'll put it in perspective, too, in that while Knobloch used him more than any other defenseman, he really was rolling 5 defensemen. I don't think of their top 5 defensemen between Cody Ceci at the top and the number 5 guy, I don't think there was more than 90 seconds of difference between their top 5. So he's really rolling his defense. My point is that after, he's 30 years of age, he's been in the league since I think his first game was back in 2013. And I think he's the first teenager in NHL history to score his first NHL goal in overtime. Neat stat about Cody Ceci. But I'm just glad to see the guy have some success because, he looked for a while until the Oiler thing came along, like a guy that was kind of bump along aimlessly in the NHL and maybe not get where he wants to go. He's not going to win a Norris Trophy anytime soon. I'll give you that. But neat to see that he's getting a little bit of success.
Yet another former Senator defenseman whipping boy.
Right.
He stepped right into Wade Redden's shoes. And to see him have some success is nice because if you're an Ottawa Senator fan and you want to cheer on a former Senator, it's much easier for you to pick Cody Ceci than it is for you to pick Vladimir Tarasenko.
Right. Yeah, Sens fans are not easy on defensemen. There is that tendency, like you say, to grab onto somebody. I think of Jared Cowan. He was another one in there. And there's been a couple of others. Thomas Chabot, you would probably put him in the mix now. But and let's talk about that for a brief second. I think that's partly due to the fact that people only watch the Ottawa Senators, as if to say Cale Makar is out there playing with perfection every single night. It's the nature of the beast as a defenseman. No matter how great you are the last line of the goalie is. But in terms of scoring opportunities that are being given up, you're going to be the guy that looks really, really bad once in a while when you get burned. And there's a lot of talent in this league. Every defenseman is going to look on occasion horrific. You just hope to mitigate those moments.
Nope, you're bang on. Like I was saying earlier, he really couldn't be a shutdown guy, even though the team saw him in that role and want him to play in that role. He really couldn't do that because the supporting staff just wasn't there to support him well enough.
Yeah, and that was their plan B too. I mean, you're not drafting a guy 15th overall to be a shutdown guy. They saw the points he put up. They saw the points he put up with the 67s, and they were hoping for more than that. But I think they saw early that this is not a point-producing defenseman, so we got to get busy on figuring out what exactly he is.
Mostly it was a hockey sense, and it still is a hockey sense issue with Cody, especially offensively. His hockey sense is not strong. He needed coaching, he needed a lot of teaching, and he needed simplification in his game. And it takes a bit of time for those things to take root, and he's there now.
Yeah, I want to check here because I don't think that Cody Ceci spent very much time in the minors. And that would be another good example of something we talked about in a recent episode about putting guys down in the minors just as a matter of policy. The Connor McDavids of the world, yes, you're 18 years old. Get your ass into the NHL. Let's go. But here's Cody Ceci, who played 30 games with the Binghamton Senators before he became a full-time NHLer. Are you telling me that Cody Ceci wouldn't have been well served with 2 or 3 full seasons down in the minors? I find that hard to believe.
Especially if that was Luke Richardson's time. I'm not sure who was coaching down there at the time, but he would have benefited from that for sure. A little more time down there.
Yeah, it was Luke Richardson, in fact, and that was a very good team too. And I mean, I think I would do that not only from a development standpoint, but I mean, you only have a player for X amount of years before he becomes a UFA, and the sooner you start that clock ticking, the sooner you can potentially lose the player. So even in the case of a guy like Stützle and Tkachuk, who are clearly ready to be contributors at the NHL level, wouldn't it have been cool to have them play 2 years down in the AHL? Now, granted, Pierre Dorion would have been tarred and feathered for that, but to be down in the minors for 2 more years and they're all the better in their first season, this being their 3rd year as a pro, way more developed, figuring out the 2 sides of the game. And now you have the guy for longer in his more prime years. So it makes sense developmentally, and it certainly makes sense financially and competitively.
Yeah, you make a good point there, Steve. I concur. I've always been a fan of the Detroit Red Wing model overripe rather than underdeveloped. I couldn't agree with you more.
Changing gears, sounds like Jack Capuano is officially out as associate coach of the Ottawa Senators. He was hired exactly the same time. It was a busy 2019. That was when Cody Ceci was traded away. That's when DJ Smyth was brought in. And that's also when Jack Capuano was brought in as Smith's associate coach. Capuano was spared the axe back in December when DJ Smyth and Davis Payne both got fired. Capuano stayed on under Jacques Martin, I think largely, Greg, because you needed somebody to run the practices. Jacques was physically unable at 71. He's got some injuries. He wasn't able to get the skates on and handle practice. And there really wasn't anybody else on the coaching staff that has a reasonable amount of time running practices at the NHL level. So it seemed natural to keep Capuano around for that.
And also, since you were bringing in Alpha, you needed somebody with the D, and that had been Capuano's spot on the bench. And I assume he had a rapport with the D, so he was the one who stayed there. It makes sense that he's not being renewed. It's time to move on and see what he can find elsewhere. It looks like he's going to Minnesota. I think that's the rumor from Mike Russo, who covers them on the Wild on the Athletic. It looks like he's going to the Minnesota Wild to fill in where Darby Hendrickson got let go, and join up with John Hines. I think the two of them they've never coached the NHL together, but maybe Team USA stuff together. He and Jack Hines and Jack Capuano. Is Jack Hines? No, it's not Jack Hines.
John Hines.
John Hines, sorry. Well, he could be a Jack. Most Johns are Jacks. Or most Jacks start out as Johns, whatever. John as in the name John, not John as
yes.
Yeah.
I know.
Clarify that. Got to clarify that.
Yeah.
It's a PG-13. Yeah. But yeah, it makes sense. I wonder, is Jack Capuano ticked about the whole Buffalo scenario that went down here a couple of years ago? How do you think he feels about that?
Well, I don't think that plays into this one. It sounds like it's the new management's decision to sweep clean. But yeah, there was an opportunity a couple of years ago where the Sabres were looking for someone. They eventually decided on Donnie Granato, but Capuano, they wanted to interview him in Buffalo, and the Sens said no. And I guess at that stage of the game with the old management, that if DJ Smyth continued on the path he was on with a poor record, maybe old management thought that Capuano was going to be that plan B guy, and that would be standard operating procedure, I think, for Eugene Melnick's clubs, because in the past he had guys like Dave Cameron come in under Paul McLean, for example. He brought in Mark Crawford under Guy Boucher, and in both cases, the assistant eventually ascended to take over the head coaching role. And so that may have been the case with Capuano as well, but obviously a lot has changed since that went down. A lot.
You are correct.
Now, Capuano is still on the website, so we should point that out because it is that report from The Athletic, but it was reported within conclusive terms, not like we're hearing already. It was like Capuano, his contract has not been renewed, and that's why the Minnesota thing came in, because that may be a fit there with Hines and the Wild. Excuse me. With Hines and the Wild. And in the meantime, the player development coach situation, Brent Wallace was reporting that there may be some changes in that area, which is interesting timing because the Donovan family is kind of being celebrated all over social media by the Senators right now. Jorian Donovan, a fifth rounder from 2022, sets up the game-winning goal in a very exciting finish to the Memorial Cup as Saginaw takes down the London Knights 4-3. And so there's all these things about, congratulations, Jorian. Da, da, da. Meanwhile, there continues to be rumblings that with Sean Donovan, Wade Redden, Jesse Winchester as the current player development coaches, that there may be some changes coming down the pipe. Nothing's been made official. There have been no announcements. But like I say, there's Brent Wallace with that report saying that there may be some new incoming dev coaches.
Well, it makes sense, right? It's new broom, new team comes in. Take time. They said we're going to evaluate things and go from there. And they want their own people, and that's normal. And I doubt that anything in any way, shape, or form is personal. It wouldn't surprise me in the case of some of them, especially Dono, if there isn't some type of position in a scouting role, a pro scouting side. All three of these guys are former pros. You think Wade Redden would have a spot somewhere if he wanted something? I could see 1, 2, or 3 of them still maintaining some sort of role in the organization, if in fact they are being let go as the development staff here. It makes sense, right? It's a new group, a new team that's sweeping out people and bringing in their own guys. I get it.
Friend of the show, Brad Smyth, has a new gig. He is joining the CCHL's Nepean Raiders. That is Tier 2 Junior A hockey. For those who do not know, I don't imagine there's many people listening right now who don't know the Nepean Raiders. But, Smitty, good friend of the program, former Ottawa Senator. And, I think it's neat. He's been rolling with the U18 AAA ranks with Myers last year and with Kempville the year before that. And neat to see him get this opportunity. Jarrett DeFazio was the head coach there, and they've got a new ownership group moving in. And so the change has been made. And our good pal Brad Smyth, who will be on the show with us next week to talk some Sens and a little bit about the Raiders as well. Nice when good things happen to good people, Greg.
Yep, and that's a program that was in need of some rejuvenating. It had kind of stagnated, if not gone backwards in the last few years. The ownership group wasn't as strong, wasn't as financially backed as you would have liked the organization. So maybe now some things are going to change. New coach, new program, new ownership. Let's hope things are going up for those Nepean Raiders.
Incredible career for Smitty. He's the American Hockey League Hall of Famer. He's the 4th leading goal scorer in AHL history, and played for 20 years and 22 pro teams. And he comes out, he hasn't been out yet, but he comes out to our Thursday night hockey in the summertime. And his last stop in the minors was with a team in the CHL called the Denver Cutthroats. And it was a neat, they had these neat ball caps with the big letter D and a fish in the middle of it kind of flipping around. And that's what, I guess, a cutthroat is, a fish.
Oh, okay.
And and so when the team, and we'll ask him about this, when the team went under, I guess he needed a paycheck or two at the, they basically just shut the door and said, well, here, take all our paraphernalia. So he left with all T-shirts and hats, and he basically got to every souvenir the Cutthroats were selling in the arena. That's what his final paycheck was as the team went under.
Severance pay.
Yeah, exactly. And so with these ball caps, he's so mumuch better than everybody else. Obviously, he comes out because he's friends with us and likes a beer afterward. But almost sarcastically, he decided, because he had so many of these hats laying around, he started giving away Denver Cutthroat hats to the player of the game in our lousy Thursday night Gordy Wilson hockey. It was great.
And everybody got a turn.
Yeah.
Everybody got to be the player of the game. Yeah. That's awesome.
No, that's not true. How dare you? So thinking about the Raiders, just to close out. So they got a new owner, they got a new coach, and they haven't been to the playoffs since 2017. Who's that remind you of, Greg? Who's that? Oh, yeah. I think we cover a team that does all those 3 things.
Smitty can turn around.
Exactly. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate you being here today. Our website, as always, sensnationhockey.com. I'll let the big voice tell you about all that stuff, but we do appreciate you being here today. Greg, enjoy your day, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Steve. See you.